I'm told Paul George suffered the injury during an on-court workout last week, and the decision was made to undergo arthroscopic surgery.
This is a gut punch to the 76ers. I cannot believe this, and I will just say there's no such thing as minor knee surgery. Even the most basic procedure requires a big recovery. Another setback for this team.
What if I told you that one of the NBA's most anticipated free agent signings has spiraled into a complete disaster so bad, it could mark the end of a Hall of Fame career? A player who was once in MVP conversations is now facing yet another major surgery on the same knee that derailed his entire first season. And instead of redemption, we're staring down the barrel of what could be another injury-riddled nightmare. But that's not even the worst part. This player's off-court focus has become just as controversial as his on-court performance. Fans aren't just disappointed, they're furious. His podcast, once seen as a refreshing voice in sports media, has now turned into a distraction during one of the team's most critical collapses. While the 76ers were falling apart late in the season, their newly minted star was more focused on podcast appearances than playoff urgency. The booing wasn't just for missed shots, it was for misplaced priorities. And now, tears a new chapter in the Paul George saga. And it's looking darker than ever. Let's rewind. On July 1st, 2024, Paul George was the crown jewel of NBA free agency. The Philadelphia 76ers didn't just want him, they went all in. They gave him a 4-year, $211.6 million deal, a massive gamble to replace the underperforming Tobias Harris, and finally build a serious contender around Joel Embiid. With Tyrese Maxey ascending and Embiid in his prime, George was supposed to be the final piece. It made sense on paper. George, a multi-time All-Star, the former face of the Indiana Pacers, and a prototype two-way wing, had the resume. The Sixers saw a championship window wide open, but the Clippers saw the writing on the wall. According to reports, they only offered George a 2-year, $60 million deal, clearly signaling concern about his long-term durability. And now, those concerns feel prophetic. Another surgery, another season in jeopardy, a city that was once buzzing with hope is now bracing for disappointment. What was meant to be a new era for the 76ers is quickly turning into a cautionary tale about trust, timing, and the heavy cost of one last roll of the dice.
So the first initial deal was like 2 years, 60. So I'm like, whoa. 2 years, 60? That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Philadelphia gave Paul George everything the Clippers wouldn't long-term security: superstar billing and a fresh chance to chase a championship. And now, they're living with the consequences. Fast forward to October 14th, 2024. It was just a preseason game against the Atlanta Hawks. On paper, nothing major. But this one game would end up changing everything in that matchup. Paul George hyperextended his left knee, the very same knee that derailed his rookie season and has haunted him ever since. At the time, the Sixers called it a bone bruise. They said it wasn't serious, but anyone paying attention knew that was a red flag. Because when you're 34 years old with Paul George's injury history, there's no such thing as a minor knee injury, especially in the preseason. He missed the first 5 games of the regular season. And right there, in the opening stretch, Philly got its first taste of what was to come. A max contract player who couldn't stay healthy, but seemed perfectly healthy when it came to hopping on a mic. When George finally returned to the court, the numbers told a different story than the hype. Through his first month back, he averaged just 14.8 points per game on 40.5% shooting. This wasn't the elite two-way wing the Sixers emptied the vault for. This wasn't the MVP caliber version of Paul George from his prime. This was a slow, hesitant, and limited version, clearly still battling physical setbacks. Then, on November 20th, things got worse. Against the Memphis Grizzlies, George re-injured the exact same knee. Another hyperextension, another diagnosis of a bone bruise. Same leg, same pain. And this time, it was no longer a coincidence. Even head coach Nick Nurse couldn't hide his concern. It was obvious. George's body was breaking down by the midpoint of the season. The damage was undeniable. Paul George was averaging just 16.2 points per game, his lowest scoring average since 2011, back when he was still finding his footing as a young player in Indiana. To put that in perspective, it marked a 42% decline from his peak year in 2019, when he averaged 28 points and finished third in MVP voting. And the efficiency? Brutal. He was shooting 43% from the field, barely above league average, and just 35.8% from beyond the arc, a notable drop from his career mark of 38.3%. But the most alarming stat of all was his production with Joel Embiid, the very superstar he was brought in to complement in their 15 games together. George averaged just 14.2 points on 41.2% shooting. That's not second option material. That's barely acceptable for a bench role. His player efficiency rating dipped to 14.5, far below his career average of 19.2. He contributed just one win share the entire season, a staggeringly low number for someone earning over $50 million. At that point, Philly fans weren't just frustrated, they were furious. But here's where the story goes from bad to bizarre. While George was missing games, putting up career-low stats, and essentially watching the Sixers slide into chaos, guess what he was doing in his free time? He was running a weekly podcast. That's right, Podcast P continued uploading every single week, like clockwork. Episode after episode, even as his team collapsed. Even as fans begged for leadership, accountability, and some sign that he cared more about the Sixers' record than a trending soundbite. The optics, absolutely brutal. Imagine this, you're a die-hard Philly fan. You spend your hard-earned money on tickets, jerseys, and cable packages. Your team is losing. Your so-called superstar is either injured or playing below average. And then you see him cracking jokes on a podcast while the season crumbles. It felt like a slap in the face. Fans started to turn fast. During the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl parade, a fan confronted Paul George in public. The message was blunt. We could have kept Tobias Harris if you were going to do this, SHT. When fans start longing for the guy you were brought in to replace, you've hit rock bottom. But the tipping point came on February 26, 2025. After the 76ers suffered their 8th straight loss, the city was already boiling with disappointment. And then, Paul George made one of the most bizarre public announcements of his career. A moment so disconnected, so off the mark. It made people wonder if he was even aware of the crisis surrounding him. Whatever hope Philadelphia had at the beginning of the season, it's gone. What was once seen as a championship window is now a cautionary tale of age, injuries, distractions, and a player who may have lost the one thing that made him great: urgency.
I want to let the Podcast P family know that after today's episode with Dwight, I plan to take a break from the pod just to focus on getting my body right, getting mentally right, and, help this squad make a push towards our goal to finish the season out, give ourselves a chance to be in contentions to compete for a championship.
Philadelphia gave Paul George everything the Clippers wouldn't: money, years, control. And now they're living with the brutal consequences. What was meant to be a fresh start quickly turned into a nightmare. It began quietly on October 14th, during a seemingly meaningless preseason game against the Atlanta Hawks. But what happened that night would change the course of George's entire season. He hyperextended his left knee, the same knee that derailed earlier stages of his career. The Sixers downplayed it, calling it a bone bruise. But when you're a 34-year-old with a long history of serious injuries, there's no such thing as a minor. Knee issue especially before the season even begins. He missed the first 5 games of the regular season, and the warning signs were already flashing. Philadelphia had signed George to a $211 million contract, expecting a difference maker. Instead, they were watching a max contract star sit out with a bad knee, and fans hadn't even seen him in a meaningful game yet. When George did finally return, it looked like a shadow of himself. In his first month back, he averaged just 14.8 points per game on 40.5% shooting, a steep fall for someone once seen as one of the most complete two-way players in the league. By November 20th, any remaining optimism collapsed. Against the Grizzlies, George suffered the same exact injury to the same exact knee. Head coach Nick Nurse admitted it was nearly identical to what had happened in the preseason. At that point, the story changed from bad luck to something far more serious. Paul George's body was breaking down by mid-season. The stats told a bleak story. George was averaging 16.2 points, his lowest output since his second year in the league. His player efficiency rating plummeted to 14.5, far below his career average of 19.2. He shot 43% from the field and 35.8% from 3, both declines from his career numbers. His net impact on the game was borderline neutral, an alarming sign for someone earning over $50 million. But the most damning part? His chemistry with Joel Embiid, the very superstar he was brought in to complement, was non-existent. In 15 games together, George averaged just 14.2 points on 41.2% shooting. The pairing looked awkward, forced, and anything but elite. Off the court, things were unraveling too. Instead of dialing in and focusing on recovery, George was still committed to his weekly podcast, and the timing couldn't have been worse. While the Sixers were spiraling toward one of their worst seasons in years, George was dropping episodes like clockwork. The optics. Disastrous picture being a loyal Philly fan. Your team is underperforming. Your highest paid player can't stay healthy. And instead of prioritizing his rehab and leadership duties, he's talking hoops on a podcast while your team crumbles. The fans noticed. Everyone noticed. During the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl parade, tensions boiled over. A frustrated fan shouted at George, "We could have kept Tobias Harris if you were gonna do this, SHT." Asterisk, it was a brutal public moment, because when the guy you were signed to replace starts looking like the better option in hindsight, you've hit rock bottom. Then came the injury that truly ended his year. On January 25th, George suffered a finger injury against the Bulls, adding a hand issue to his growing list of physical problems. Now he was dealing with both a bad knee and a hand injury. He was quite literally being held together by tape and prayer. By March, desperation took over. George was so determined to play that he began taking pain-killing injections just to get on the court. He admitted it publicly. "I'm hanging in there. I'm just trying to give this team everything I have." And while the effort was admirable, the timing made no sense. The season was already lost. Why risk long-term health for a team going nowhere? It didn't feel like competitive drive anymore. It felt like a player trying to cling to relevance. A player who knew deep down that his body was fading and his prime was already gone. His last game of the season came on March 17th, where he scored just 7 points on 3 of -11 shooting against Minnesota. Quiet, ineffective. A fitting end to a season defined by unfulfilled promise. Then, on July 14th, came the final blow. The Sixers announced that George had undergone arthroscopic surgery on his left knee, the same knee that had been troubling him all season. Performed by Dr. Jonathan Glashow in New York, the team called it a cleanup procedure. But anyone paying attention knows better. This wasn't cleanup. This was confirmation. At 35 years old, George's knee hasn't healed. may it's gotten worse. And the Sixers. They're calling it a reevaluation for training camp. In reality, that's code 4. We have no idea when he'll be ready, and that is terrifying. Paul George has now missed significant time in 5 of his last 6 seasons. He's owed $51.7 million next year, followed by $54.2 million in 2026-27 and $56.7 million in 2027-28, which he will opt into. That's $162.6 million for a player who's no longer elite, no longer durable, and whose body is showing signs of irreversible decline. The warning signs were there. The Clippers saw it. They lowballed George with a short-term offer, and many criticized them for it. But in hindsight, they looked like geniuses. They bet that George's body wouldn't hold up past 35, and they were right, even if the Sixers wanted to trade him. The market is nearly non-existent. Who's going to take on a contract of that size for a 35-year-old with a bad knee, declining production, and a reputation for inconsistency? And the worst part? It's not just about his game. It's about leadership poor, the lack of it. George himself admitted that it was Kyle Lowry, not him, who emerged as the team's vocal leader. For someone brought in to be the veteran voice, the missing puzzle piece, and a locker room presence passing the torch like that is a major indictment. Injuries happen, decline is inevitable. But what's happened with Paul George isn't just decline. It's a collapse physically, professionally, and reputationally. He's not the same player, not the same presence. And Philadelphia is now chained to the worst contract in the NBA, watching their championship dreams bleed out one injury at a time.
For our locker room, Kyle Lowry stepped up and was the voice every single day.
Think about that. A 39-year-old role player had to step up because the guy on the max contract couldn't lead. That's not just disappointing, it's embarrassing. Paul George's fall from an MVP-caliber player to an injury-prone, overpaid veteran isn't just sad, it's a warning. A warning about what happens when you gamble on aging stars with long injury histories. His July 14th knee surgery wasn't just a setback, was a signal that the same issues that destroyed his 202-425 season will likely haunt him into 2025-26 and beyond. At 35, there's no real path back to elite form. The decline is clear, a 42% drop in scoring, only 50% availability. And advanced stats showing he's now playing at a borderline replacement level. The injuries keep piling up, the production keeps falling, and his $21.6 million contract, completely untradeable. Philly made a huge bet that George could stay healthy and productive, and they lost badly. This isn't just the end of Paul George as a star, might be the beginning of the end of his entire NBA career. So, if you're a Sixers fan, how do you feel about this collapse? Let me know in the comments. I'm your boy Mike, and I'm out till next time.